The Hall of Echoes in the Azura Dominion was a place of cold grandeur. Its vaulted ceiling shimmered with shifting blue light, mimicking the deep currents of Azura's endless oceans. Every flicker of luminescence rippled over the solemn faces of those gathered, casting the chamber in a hypnotic underwater glow. Rowan stood near the rear, straight-backed and uncomfortable, his Sol Union uniform a drab splash of practicality amid the swirling robes and crystalline armor of the Azuran delegates. He felt like an intruder in a cathedral of ancient secrets, keenly aware of every darting glance from the Dominion's elites. The floor beneath his boots was inlaid with silver and pearl, each step reflecting the crowd, a living mosaic of power, tradition, and suspicion. The air vibrated with the whisper of ceremonial chants as the investiture began. All eyes were fixed on Princess Lyra. Lyra moved through the throng with a poise that dared anyone to call her vulnerable. Her blue skin glowed softly, the light catching the edges of her angular face, accentuating the fiery cascade of red hair that fell down her back. Her violet eyes, sharp and wary, flicked briefly over Rowan, dismissing him as an afterthought. With every stride toward the sapphire dais, she projected the image of a noble heir, unflinching even as tension pulled at her shoulders. Matriarch Ceres awaited her at the dais, statuesque and resplendent in her ceremonial regalia. The chamber seemed to hold its breath as Ceres raised her arms, voice ringing out in the ancient tongue of Azura, summoning the ancestors and invoking the sacred rite of succession. Lyra knelt, lowering her head in a gesture of obedience that looked uncomfortably close to surrender. Then, with a motion as sudden as a shark's lunge, the rhythm shattered. The matriarch's own guards, hulking, impassive figures, turned on her in perfect unison. In a blur of movement, they seized Ceres, pinning her arms behind her back. The hall erupted in gasps and outrage, but the guards were relentless, their actions chillingly efficient. Lord Varek stepped forward, his bearing severe, the cold planes of his face illuminated in blue and silver. "The Dominion's line is broken," he declared, his voice slicing through the chaos. "The ruling house is dissolved. All must bear witness." Before anyone could protest, Varek made a subtle gesture. One of the guards produced a thin blade of crystalline energy and, with a single precise motion, executed the matriarch. Her body slumped to the floor in silence, her lifeblood spreading across the pearl inlay. The shock radiated outward, paralyzing the hall. Lyra recoiled, a raw, silent scream twisting her features as two guards seized her. Dragged to the center, Lyra was forced to her knees. Ancient shackles, their design unmistakably archaic and cruel, were produced from an ornate chest. The guards locked them around her wrists and ankles, binding her to the twin pillars of judgment that rose from the floor like the bones of some ancient leviathan. The symbolism was not lost on anyone, the Dominion's darkest history, resurrected before their eyes. Varek's voice rang out again, accusation heavy in every syllable. "Lyra, firstborn of Ceres, you are charged with consorting with outsiders, an act of treason. By the will of the Assembly, you are sentenced to public dismemberment. Let this be the fate of those who betray our blood." Rowan's heart hammered in his chest, the words twisting into a knot of dread. He could feel the weight of every gaze, the anticipation of violence. Yet somewhere in the haze of terror and protocol, he remembered Article 9, Section D of the Sol Union's Code. His voice broke through the commotion. "By Interstellar Code, Article 9, Section D, I invoke protective custody for an endangered dignitary of the Azura Dominion," he declared, his words trembling but clear. The hall fell utterly silent. Even Varek froze, eyes narrowing with predatory suspicion. Rowan moved, forcing himself forward, every step echoing in the vast chamber. He knelt by Lyra, his fingers finding the ceremonial lock on her shackles. The mechanism was ancient but familiar. He worked it with hands that shook only a little. After a tense, breathless pause, the lock snapped open with a metallic groan that echoed through the hall. Weapons hissed from their sheaths. Azuren guards advanced, faces set, but the doors at the rear slammed open. Ambassador Merrick strode in, his presence radiating authority, flanked by a squad of Union guards in battle armor. Merrick's voice cut through the tension. "The Sol Union stands by its envoy. Stand down, Lord Varek." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hover on the edge of violence. Varek's lips thinned, but he saw he was cornered. With a contemptuous flick of his wrist, he signaled his men to lower their weapons. Lyra sagged as the shackles fell away. Rowan caught her as she collapsed, her body shaking with adrenaline and grief. Their eyes met, hers wide with shock and defiance, his reflecting a fierce empathy. "Stay with me," he whispered, half a plea, half a promise. Union guards closed ranks around them, ushering Rowan and Lyra out of the Hall of Echoes. The Azuran nobles stared after them, their outrage simmering beneath a veneer of decorum. Every step away from that hall felt like a retreat from a world on the brink of civil war. Inside the embassy, the air was thick with tension. Ambassador Merrick cornered Rowan in a marble-lined corridor. "You endangered the entire mission," Merrick snapped, his tone thunderous. "That was not your call to make." Rowan squared his shoulders. "It was the only call. We don't let people get executed for spectacle, Ambassador." Merrick glared, but there was something like grudging respect in his eyes. "You'd better hope you're right," he muttered before turning away. Lyra was led to a guest suite so lavish it seemed almost mocking. Gilded walls, soft blue drapes, intricate mosaics of ocean life. Yet the guards at the door and the lock on the balcony made it clear. This was a cell by another name. When Rowan finally entered, Lyra was pacing the room, shoulders rigid, head high despite the exhaustion in her posture. As soon as the door closed, she rounded on him. "You've traded one prison for another," she said, her voice sharp with bitterness. "What do you want from me? A confession? Cooperation? Or just the spectacle of a caged air?" Rowan shook his head. "You're a guest, not a captive." She laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. "A guest with guards at the door and no way out?" He tried to meet her gaze, tried to find the words. "Where I come from, we don't let people get torn apart for spectacle." For a moment, something shifted in her expression. A reluctant smile flickered on her lips, quickly hidden. A strange kind of courage, envoy. Or maybe just madness. Before he could reply, the embassy's alarms blared, shrill, urgent. A guard burst in, eyes wide. "Azuran drone sighted, breaching device attached to the east wing." Rowan moved to Lyra's side instinctively, his hand finding the small of her back. "We have to go. Now." The halls filled with the rush of boots and shouts. Guards hustled them deeper into the embassy, past sealed blast doors and scanning turrets. Rowan's touch was meant as reassurance, but it lingered, an unspoken current passing between them. A sudden blast rocked the building, shattering a window in a spray of glass and salt wind. For a moment, chaos threatened to consume everything. Rowan shielded Lyra, his own breath catching as he saw blood blooming on her arm, a jagged shard embedded near her elbow. They reached a secure room, the alarms dying down. Rowan knelt beside Lyra, hands steady as he cleaned the wound, his touch gentle and precise. Blood welled, bright against her blue skin. She watched him with a kind of wary fascination, her pain momentarily forgotten. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Neither did you." Their vulnerability lingered in the air, raw and honest, blurring the line between protector and protected. For a heartbeat they saw each other, not as envoy and heir, but as two people caught in a storm neither had chosen. The embassy was besieged, a fortress under siege in both mind and body. The blue dawn brought no respite. Every screen in the city pulsed with Varek's visage, his voice echoing through public squares and private chambers alike. "Traitor," he intoned, Lyra's face displayed beside his. "Heir no longer. She would sell our dominion to foreign hands." The message twisted, refracted through hollow banners and news bursts, growing darker and more venomous with each retelling. It was psychological warfare, and Rowan recognized the pattern instantly. He'd seen it before, on worlds where truth bent beneath the weight of spectacle. In the embassy's strategy room, Lyra's jaw tightened as she watched Varek's latest broadcast. The image flickered, her face imposed over scenes of Dominion soldiers in ruin, the voiceover heavy with accusation. Rowan leaned forward, arms folded on the table, mind racing. "He wants the people angry," he said quietly. "Afraid. They'll believe almost anything if he says it with enough certainty." Lyra glared at the screen. "And what do you suggest? Fight words with more words?" Rowan grinned, unexpected mischief lighting his eyes. "Not just words. Humor. Satire. You see, people laugh at what scares them. Varek's not funny. He's terrifying. If we make him look ridiculous, his power slips." She arched an elegant eyebrow, skepticism clear. "We are not court jesters, Rowan." "Exactly," he replied. "That's why it'll work. The Azurans expect solemnity from their rulers. If we undercut Varek with irreverence, he'll have no idea how to respond." Lyra considered this, arms crossed. "You truly think mockery will turn the tide?" "I've watched entire revolutions begin with jokes, Lyra. Trust me, let's try it, if only to annoy him." Her lips twitched, resisting a smile. "Very well. But if we're to do this, we do it properly. Let's see where his rhetoric is weakest." They spent long nights hunched over terminals, Varek's broadcasts looping endlessly. Rowan pointed out the leader's overwrought phrases, exaggerating his gestures, mimicking his deep, self-important tone. Lyra tried to resist, but soon she was laughing despite herself, shaking her head at Rowan's antics. Her laughter sounded rusty, as if it had not been used in a long time. "Look," Rowan said, pausing the latest clip. "He says, 'betrayal' so often it's lost all meaning. You could swap it for 'bad haircut' and no one would notice." Lyra grinned, emboldened. "Or how he speaks of purity, as if he's ever soiled his own hands." They crafted counter-messages together. Hollow cartoons of Varek losing his train of thought, parodies where his fiery speeches devolved into farce, even a musical number where the entire Dominion leadership danced in chorus lines. Lyra took surprising pleasure in dissecting Varek's arguments, exposing the logical gaps with razor-sharp wit. Rowan watched her, fascinated by the way her focus narrowed, the subtle shift in her posture when inspiration struck, the tension in her jaw when frustration built. He learned to read her as they worked. When her shoulders squared, she was planning. When her lips pressed thin, she was holding back anger. Lyra, for her part, began to appreciate Rowan's irreverence. His thinking leapt from idea to idea, untethered by protocol, and she found herself drawn to his unpredictable creativity. Their partnership deepened with each night spent side by side. One evening, as they hunched over Varek's latest speech, their shoulders touched. Neither moved away. The contact lingered, a silent acknowledgement of trust, of something growing in the spaces between their words. Rowan glanced at her, their faces closer than either intended. "You know," he murmured, "you're really good at this." She looked down, a rare flush warming her cheeks. "Perhaps I simply needed the right adversary." "Or the right partner," he said, the words heavy with implication, The line between formality and familiarity blurred, replaced by the rhythm of two conspirators against the world. Even the embassy guards, once wary, began to treat Lyra as an honored guest rather than a captive. Then, in the midst of this uneasy camaraderie, a new danger slipped through their defenses. Late one night, as they reviewed the day's flood of propaganda, Rowan's terminal chimed, an encrypted message, its code unfamiliar. Lyra stiffened. That encryption, it's council class. Only one person I know still uses it. They worked together to break the code, their heads bent over the console, breath mingling in the narrow space. The message unfolded line by line, revealing its contents in pulses of light. "It's from Salin," Lyra whispered, her fingers trembling for the first time. "My advisor." "He's alive." Rowan watched her scan the text, reading it aloud. "Varek's coup is not his alone. The Drath Syndicate supports him. They seek the relic, the ancient device in the outer reaches. Only the royal bloodline can access it. They needed a living key. That's why they executed my mother. They thought the trauma would trigger the genetic sequence. They will come for me next." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Lyra sat back, shaken, her composure unraveling. Rowan reached for her, steadying her hands in his. For the first time, she let herself lean on him, her mask of strength slipping. "It was never about the throne," she said, voice hollow. "I was a cipher to them. A code to unlock a weapon." Rowan's grip tightened. "You're more than that. And now we know the truth. We can fight back." She looked up, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. "I cannot do this alone." "You're not alone," he promised. A new intimacy settled between them, a bond forged in shared peril, no longer just obligation. When Lyra exhaled, it was a shudder of surrender, a silent trust placed in Rowan's hands. They returned to the strategy table, star maps sprawled before them, planning their next move. Their hands brushed as they traced possible routes to the outer reaches. This time, the contact was intentional, neither pulling away. "We have to warn the Loyalists," Rowan said. "Expose Varric and the Drath. If we can rally even a handful of admirals—" "It will mean civil war," Lyra interrupted, her voice steadying. "But it may be the only way to save the Dominion from Syndicate rule." He nodded. "We'll need to use the embassy's hidden comms room. It's shielded, secure. If we're quick—" She squeezed his hand. "Let's do it together." Night cloaked the embassy in nervous silence as they slipped through the halls, pressed close in shadowed corridors. Every touch, every whispered word was charged with urgency. Guards turned a blind eye, their loyalty quietly shifting. In the cramped comms closet, Rowan hunched over the control panel, fingers flying, while Lyra kept watch at the door, her silhouette tense and regal in the dim glow. "Almost there," Rowan whispered. "Keep an eye out." She glanced back, eyes meeting his. "I trust you." The message went out, coded, urgent, evidence attached. As Rowan hit send, alarms erupted, a wail of detection. They exchanged a single wild-eyed look before sprinting back through the darkened halls. Their hands found each other, gripping tightly, adrenaline fusing them together as they dodged patrols and ducked into alcoves. At last, breathless, they tumbled back into their suite. Rowan laughed, the sound shaking with relief. Lyra leaned against the door, eyes shining. "You were amazing," Rowan said, the words spilling out with a mixture of awe and affection. She caught his gaze, lips curving into a real smile. "We both were." Their eyes locked, the world narrowing to the space between them. Rowan stepped closer. Lyra met him halfway. Their kiss was fierce and desperate, a collision of survival and longing, the past and future dissolving in the heat of the moment. In that embrace, they found not just solace, but the beginnings of a love forged under fire. The consequences were swift and brutal. By dawn, the Azuran fleet fractured across the void, starships exchanging signals, some loyal to Varek, others openly denouncing him as the Drath Syndicate's plot came to light. Civil war erupted in orbit and across the cities below. Rowan watched the news feeds spiral out of control, the Dominion's banners shredded and replaced by chaos. Varek's voice, once composed, now crackled with desperation over every channel. "Find Lyra!" he thundered, his image distorted by stress and static. "Bring her to me. Alive or dead, I do not care. No cost is too great." The embassy trembled as the first explosions tore through the lower levels, shattering windows and sending cascades of dust from the ceilings. Alarms wailed, their shrill cry drowned by the deeper rumble of artillery outside. Rowan and Lyra were thrown together, diving behind an overturned table as the shields flickered under the assault. A second blast rocked the wall behind them, shards of crystallized paneling raining down. Rowan choked on smoke and adrenaline, but Lyra was already moving, her eyes sharp and unflinching. "Enemy movement, southwest flank," she called over the roar, peering through a fractured window. "They're coordinating, Drath mercenaries, mixed with Varek's loyalists." He marveled at her calm, the way she mapped the chaos and found order. Even as the building threatened to come down around them, Lyra moved with the poise of a born commander. Her voice cut through panic, directing embassy security, analyzing every threat. In that crucible, Rowan's admiration deepened, respect growing into something fiercer. He fumbled at his belt, drawing his soul sidearm and pressed it into her palm. "You know how to use one of these?" She gave him a crooked smile, the glow of her blue skin marred by sweat and dust. "Better than you, probably." He laughed, but the sound was brittle. They pressed through the smoke-filled corridor, weapons raised. Rowan covered her as she slid into an alcove, his hand steady over hers as she aimed. The embassy shook again. Somewhere above, the ceiling cracked with a groan. She fired at a shadow moving down the hallway, and the figure dropped. "Nice shot," Rowan said, trying to inject levity into the carnage. She caught his gaze, fierce and vulnerable at once. "I won't let them harm you, Rowan. You are my impossible human." He covered her trembling fingers with his own. "And I won't let them take you. Not while I breathe." The firefight intensified. Syndicate drones buzzed overhead, their beams slicing through barricades. Azuran guards in crystal armor fell back, overrun. Lyra led Rowan through the chaos, her voice a lifeline in the confusion. At the main atrium, a syndicate enforcer, a giant in exoskeletal armor, burst through the doors, scattering debris and guards alike. Lyra reacted instantly. She shouted a command in the Azuran tongue, sharp, rapid syllables that made the enforcer hesitate, confusion flickering behind his visor. Rowan seized the moment, firing 2 precise shots into the armor's weak points. The enforcer staggered, dropping to one knee. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. Exhilaration, fear, and respect, mingling in the charged silence. Then the radio on Rowan's belt crackled. "Evac protocol, North Terrace. 4 minutes," came the security chief's strained voice. "The building's coming down." Smoke thickened. Rowan grabbed Lyra's hand, pulling her into a run as the embassy's structure groaned and fractured above them. They sprinted through collapsing halls, dodging bursts of gunfire and falling beams. Rowan's lungs burned, but Lyra never faltered, her grip strong, her presence anchoring him in the chaos. They burst into the embassy's once lush garden, now choked with debris and fire. Beyond the shattered columns, a Union shuttle hovered, its ramp lowered, engines screaming against the turmoil. Guards motioned them forward, but blocking their path stood Varek, armored head to toe, his eyes wild beneath the helmet's faceplate. "You will not leave," he snarled, voice amplified and distorted. "The throne is mine. The relic will be mine. You. He pointed at Lyra, gauntleted finger trembling. You have nowhere left to run. Rowan aimed his weapon, but Lyra stepped forward, hand on his arm. No more running, she said quietly. She turned to face Varric, eyes unflinching. You are always a coward, Varric. You hide behind others' strength. Let's see how you fare in the old ways. She shifted her stance, adopting the traditional Azuran dueling posture, feet apart, body angled, one hand loose at her side. Varric, enraged, charged. Lyra moved with deceptive grace, sidestepping and catching his arm in a practiced twist. He overbalanced, crashing to one knee. In that instant, Rowan and the chief lunged, weapons at the ready, pinning Varric to the ground. Lyra breathed hard, adrenaline making her hands shake. Rowan caught her as she staggered, eyes wide with relief and pride. Together, they dragged Varric aside, securing him as the shuttle crew waved frantically. Go! Now! The pilot shouted. Rowan pulled Lyra up the ramp, the chief close behind. The shuttle lifted off just as the embassy's dome collapsed in a wave of blue fire, the world below swallowed by smoke and civil war. Inside the shuttle, the engine's roar faded into a hush. Rowan and Lyra collapsed onto the narrow bench, battered and bruised, sweat streaking grime across their faces. They sat in silence, chests heaving, the enormity of what they'd escaped settling in. Rowan turned, studying her profile in the dim cabin light. The regal mask Lyra wore for the world was gone, stripped away by loss and exhaustion. What remained was raw strength, vulnerability shining through the cracks. She met his gaze, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen. She reached for his hand, their fingers entwining, grounding each other in the aftermath. In that fragile, flickering peace, they found solace, two survivors, holding tight as the fires of war burned far below. Aboard the Sol Union cruiser Horizon, Sanctuary felt almost unreal. The galaxy outside reeled in the aftermath of civil war, but within the sealed hush of the officer's suite, Rowan and Lyra found a fragile peace. One so new it trembled at every sound beyond the bulkhead. The gentle hum of the ship's core was a lullaby after days of chaos. Lyra stood in the center of the room, uncertainty clinging to her like a second skin. Her blue glow was subdued in the soft artificial light, and though her posture remained regal, she looked every bit the Empress without a throne, rootless, fragile, yet unbroken. The shock of what she had lost, and what she had reclaimed, made her seem at once ageless and impossibly young. Rowan watched her from across the small space, his own heart battered by the cost of survival. The subtle scars of battle were written on his face, but it was his eyes, so clear and earnest, that drew her back from the edge of despair. He crossed to her quietly, his hands reaching to frame her face, gentle and grounding. "We can breathe now," he said softly, his voice a thread of warmth in the sterile air. Lyra closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. For a moment she allowed herself to believe him. She let the weight of expectation slip from her shoulders, her jaw unclenching, her breath finally steady. The ache in her chest eased as she felt Rowan's certainty, unshakable, even in the midst of all they had lost. She opened her eyes, searching his face. "You risked everything for me, Rowan. The Sol Union. Your future." He shook his head, brushing his thumb along her cheek. "My career is finished. That much is certain. But I have no regrets." He smiled, a soft, self-deprecating curve of the lips. "I'd do it again. For you. Every time." Something inside Lyra loosened, a knot unraveling. "You shouldn't have to bear that burden." He leaned his forehead to hers, his voice barely above a whisper. "We both carry burdens, Lyra, but tonight we leave them at the door." He kissed her then, slow and sure, the kind of kiss that was both promise and surrender. The tension that had kept them upright through battle and loss melted into something else, something healing. She wrapped her arms around his neck, fingers tangling in his hair, and let herself be claimed by the certainty in his embrace. Rowan lifted her easily, carrying her across the room to the narrow bed. The moment was both tender and urgent, a joining born of relief and the knowledge of all they'd endured. They shed the last remnants of armor, literal and figurative, finding solace in each other's arms. Their passion was a language spoken without words, gratitude, longing, the fierce joy of survival. When at last they lay together in the quiet aftermath, Lyra traced the lines of Rowan's face with trembling fingers. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small but hopeful. He caught her hand and kissed her palm. "Whatever you want. I'm with you." She smiled, the first true smile he'd seen since the war began. Days blurred together, marked by the shifting tides of news from the Dominion. The civil war that had split Azura was ending. Lyra's loyalists, emboldened by the revelation of the Drath Syndicate's manipulation, rallied to her cause. Admirals who had once wavered returned to her side. Reports filtered in of Varek's capture, the Syndicate's defeat, and the slow restoration of order. Rowan watched Lyra transform. In war councils and debriefings, she became the matriarch her people needed. Commanding, compassionate, unyielding. She learned the names of every crew member aboard Horizon who had risked their lives for her. When the time came, she returned to Azura for her investiture, the world watching as she was crowned not only by right of blood, but by the will of a people who had nearly lost everything. Rowan's fate was less public, but no less significant. The Sol Union's council summoned him, their censure swift and formal. He stood in the great marble chamber, Lyra at his side, and listened as his superiors listed the ways he had broken protocol, jeopardized diplomatic relations, endangered his career. He met every accusation with calm acceptance. "You asked me to be your eyes and ears," he said. "I saw a chance to save more than a treaty. I saw a chance to save lives. If that's a crime, I accept it." There was a pause, and then a different verdict. Though Rowan's record was officially marked, he was quietly honored in the corridors that mattered. His actions had not only saved the Dominion from collapse, but also forced the Union to reconsider its own rigid doctrines. The unspoken word was respect. The Sol Union and the Dominion, once teetering on the edge of mutual distrust, entered cautious negotiations. Lyra became a tireless reformer, seeking justice for those wronged and forging new alliances from the ashes. Rowan served as her advisor and confidant, his knowledge of both worlds invaluable. Their partnership was seamless. In council meetings, Lyra's voice rang out, measured but passionate, while Rowan worked behind the scenes, smoothing tensions and dismantling the last remnants of the Syndicate's influence. When the days grew long and the burdens heavy, they found each other in quiet moments, sharing the kind of laughter that was possible only after surviving so much loss. They became inseparable, each drawing strength from the other. Lyra, once alone in her duty, now found herself bolstered by Rowan's unwavering loyalty. Rowan, adrift without a place in the Union, discovered purpose at her side. Their love, born of desperation and forged in adversity, became a new foundation, one sturdy enough to rebuild a fractured world. One evening, as the horizon of Azura glittered beneath the twin moons, Rowan stood with Lyra on a balcony overlooking the city. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming night flowers, the peace, fragile but real. Lyra slipped her hand into his. "Are you ready for the next battle, advisor?" He grinned, squeezing her fingers. "Only if you're leading." She laughed, the sound rich and free. "Together, then." He drew her close, their foreheads touching, eyes closed against the weight and wonder of what lay ahead. Together, they faced a new world, their hearts bound by the memory of everything they had survived, and the hope of all they could build from the ashes. 2 years later, Rowan stood on the balcony of their villa on Miraloon, letting the sea breeze ruffle his hair. The sky glowed in colors he'd never learned to name, streaked with indigos and pearly violets, a world away from the war-torn vistas of Azura or the cold corridors of the Sol Union. Below, the endless sea shimmered beneath 3 moons, gentle waves lapping at the pale sands, and for once, there was nothing to fear. No alarms, no demands, just the quiet, the scent of salt, and the memory of chaos receding like a tide. He closed his eyes, savoring the moment until arms slipped around his waist from behind, warm and certain. Lyra pressed her cheek against his back, her presence as unmistakable as ever. "You're thinking too loudly, Rowan," she teased, her voice half laughter, half admonition. He smiled, reaching down to cover her hands with his. "You always said humans were an open book." She nuzzled into him. "You are, especially when you brood." He turned in her embrace, taking her in. Matriarch Lyra, restorer of the Dominion, conqueror of impossible odds, now barefoot, hair unbound, eyes bright with the color of twilight. The weight of her crown did not show here, though he could see the traces of her journey in the gentler lines at the corners of her eyes. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," Rowan said softly, drawing her closer. 2 years ago, I didn't know if we'd survive another sunrise." Lyra's smile softened. "Now you're Consort Ambassador Rowan of Miraloon, a title you invented, I believe." He grinned, unrepentant. The Dominion needed a new kind of diplomacy. "And I needed you," she replied, her tone teasing, but her grip tightening. They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the horizon where distant islands floated on the haze. The villa had been Rowan's idea, a retreat carved into coral cliffs, surrounded by wild gardens and silence broken only by bird song. Here, Lyra could shed the protocols of rule and simply exist. Here, Rowan could remember that his life was his own, not just a page in someone else's chronicle. "You know," Lyra began, her voice hesitant for the first time that morning, "the Council wants to revisit the question of the astral engine. They fear what it might inspire, what it might awaken." Rowan studied her, hearing the fatigue behind her words. "What do you want, Lyra? Not as matriarch. As you." She leaned against the railing, eyes distant. "I want to let the relic sleep. We have enough power, enough ghosts. The Dominion needs to build, not conquer. I want to create something lasting, something gentle." He nodded, brushing a strand of red hair from her cheek. "That's a soul saying. Adversity makes us stronger. I think you're living proof. You took what tried to break you and made it a foundation." She gave a rueful laugh. "I was never meant for peace." "Not really. I was trained to be the sharpest blade in the chamber. Now the world asks me to be a gardener." "Maybe that's your greatest strength," Rowan replied, voice soft but certain. "You learned to bend, not break. You showed the Dominion how to change, and you let me stand beside you, even when it would have been easier to send me away." She met his gaze, something vulnerable shining beneath the poise. "I chose to walk through the door you held open, Rowan. We both changed history, not with battles, but with trust." He kissed her forehead, letting his lips linger. "You changed me too. I used to think love was a luxury. Now I know it's the only thing that endures." The years had reshaped Lyra. Where once she had stood as a symbol of rigid honor, the living memory of ancient traditions, she was now the architect of progress. She had established a council, blending Azuran heritage with the flexible pragmatism of the Sol Union. Laws had shifted, old injustices exposed to daylight and reformed. The Dominion's wounds were healing, not just with treaties, but with the new, difficult work of understanding. Rowan saw it every day, in the way Lyra spoke to her people, in the patience she showed for dissent, in the warmth she reserved for him when the doors closed and the world faded away. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked quietly. "The certainty of before?" She considered the question, her arms still wrapped around him. "Sometimes. Simplicity is seductive. But then I remember how brittle I was, how much I feared any change. Now, I think I am more myself than I ever was, and I have you to thank for that." He laughed, the sound low and affectionate. "I only showed you the door. You did the hard part. You walked through." She shook her head, smiling. "You're too modest for your own good, Rowan. I suppose that's why the council tolerates you." He feigned offense. "Tolerates? I am beloved on at least 3 continents." She pinched his side, making him squirm. "The sole trait of exaggeration persists, I see." As the morning wore on, the formality of titles and burdens faded. Lyra's bearing softened, her posture relaxing as she leaned fully into Rowan's arms. The peace of Miraloon wrapped around them, a cocoon spun of hard-won victories and gentle mornings. "I needed this," she murmured, voice nearly lost in the sound of the wind. "I forget sometimes that I am more than a matriarch, that I can just be Lyra. Your Lyra." He rested his chin atop her head. "That's why I dragged you here, remember? Even matriarchs need to rest. And men, well, we need to love them, if we're lucky." She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, her expression earnest. "You are very lucky." He grinned, leaning down until their lips met. The kiss was gentle, lingering, a quiet celebration of survival, of hope, of the passion that had carried them through fire and loss. The urgency of their past had softened into something deeper, steadier. It was the kind of love that asked nothing but presence and promised everything in return. Rowan swept her up, cradling her against his chest as he carried her inside. Sunlight spilled over them, painting their skin in gold and blue. The world outside faded to silence as the villa's doors closed, leaving only the hush of breath and the quiet thrum of hearts at peace. In the privacy of their room, they rediscovered each other, laughter and whispers echoing in the morning light. Their intimacy was unhurried, shaped by gratitude rather than fear. In one another's arms, they found not just passion, but renewal, the assurance that peace, once won, could be held and cherished, even as the world continued to turn beyond the balcony. In the quiet that followed, the world seemed to shrink to the sun-warmed sheets and the slow rhythm of 2 hearts at rest. Lyra lay nestled against Rowan, her head pillowed on his chest, his arm cradling her with absent-minded devotion. Morning spilled soft light across the room, gold and blue intermingling, as if even the dawn had learned to blend their worlds. Outside, the waves caressed the alien shore, but inside, time stretched and softened, their peace unbroken. Lyra traced idle patterns over Rowan's skin, her touch feather-light, each movement both soothing and possessive. The old scars that mapped his chest, ghosts of plasma burns and blade grazes, had faded, leaving pale reminders that spoke of battles survived and losses endured. Her own body carried its history too, though the marks were more subtle. A faint line on her forearm, the memory of shackles on her wrists. The war was long past, the Dominion stable, the galaxy, at least for now, at rest. But beneath the tranquility, memory lingered, fire and fear, corridors echoing with alarms, the crushing weight of fate pressing them together and nearly tearing them apart. Lyra's breath rose and fell in time with Rowan's, their intimacy both a refuge and a celebration of what they had reclaimed. They were no longer just survivors. They were architects of peace, of trust, of a new era that stretched outward to the stars. She stirred, her voice a low murmur against his heart. "Your thoughts are loud this morning, almost as loud as your snoring." He chuckled, his fingers curling in her hair. "That's a vicious rumor. I am famously quiet, except when I'm saving galaxies." She propped herself up on one elbow, her eyes bright with mischief and something deeper. "You're noisy in every way, Rowan, especially when you try to pretend you're not thinking about work." He grinned, rolling to face her fully. "For once, I'm not. I have no thoughts of councils or treaties or anything beyond this room." He leaned in, brushing his lips to hers. A kiss that was neither hurried nor urgent, but full of certainty and contentment. "Right now, all I want is you." She melted into the kiss, her earlier teasing dissolving into gentle laughter. "I like you like this, unburdened. You should do it more often." He stroked her cheek, memorizing the contours of her face as if he could etch them into his soul. "You make it possible. You're the reason I can let go." She settled back against him, sighing with satisfaction. "We've come a long way from the Hall of Echoes," she mused, tracing a circle over his heart. "Do you ever think about that day?" "Sometimes," he admitted, his voice distant for a moment. "It feels like another life. I was so certain I was doing the right thing, even though I had no idea what would come next. I think I just couldn't stand to see you broken." She smiled, eyes glistening with the memory. "You broke the chains. Not just the ones on my wrists, but the ones around my heart, around our futures." He shook his head in wonder. "I never imagined I'd be here, on an alien moon, in love with the woman who changed the course of history." She brushed her lips over his chest, the gesture as natural as breath. "We both changed the course. You held the door open. I chose to walk through." He pulled her close, tucking her head beneath his chin. "Do you regret it?" "Never," she said, fierce and gentle at once. "We built something neither of us could have alone." Silence fell, but it was the kind that brimmed with understanding. The Dominion was stable now, transformed by collaboration and reform. Lyra's vision had reshaped her world, but it was Rowan's stubborn hope, his unwillingness to accept the boundaries of tradition and politics, that had made the difference. Together, they had negotiated not just peace, but a new possibility, a dominion that listened and adapted, a Sol union that learned to trust. Beyond their villa, the galaxy still shimmered with uncertainty, but here, possibility was as real as the dawn. Lyra's leadership was no longer about rule, but about stewardship. Rowan, officially consort ambassador, was more than a title. He was her partner, her confidant, the steady force that anchored her to the present. She rolled onto her back, gazing at the ceiling where sunlight dappled the beams. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day? If you'd followed orders?" He laughed, the sound quiet and wry. "I'd probably be rotting in some backwater post, cursing my luck, and wondering what became of the princess I let die." She caught his hand, lacing their fingers together. "But you didn't. You rewrote the script." He squeezed her hand, smiling softly. "We both did. And we're still writing it." She turned her head, eyes shining with emotion. "Promise me we'll always find our way back to this, no matter what comes." He bent to kiss her, sealing the promise with warmth. "Always." The waves outside lapped at the shore, a steady heartbeat. The air was tinged with the scent of distant flowers, the promise of a future unfolding just beyond the horizon. For the first time in either of their lives, they could let go of vigilance, of the need to fight for every breath. They could simply be. Lyra curled closer, her body fitting against his as if made for this moment. "I wish I could give this peace to everyone," she murmured. He pressed a kiss to her hair. One day, maybe we will. You've already changed the Dominion. Now you're changing me. She laughed quietly, brushing her thumb over his knuckles. Not just you. You're infecting the whole council with your irreverence. They're almost fun. He grinned. Scandalous. I hope you're not blaming me for all their bad habits. She shook her head. I thank you for them. You remind us all that we're alive. They lay in silence, listening to the soft symphony of dawn, waves, birdsong, their own steady breaths. Lyra's thoughts drifted, no longer burdened by the weight of impossible choices. Rowan's presence was her anchor, his love, the quiet miracle that had made survival worthwhile. Their love was unlikely, born in desperation, tested by fire, and proven in the peace that followed. It was resilient, transformative, the kind of love that did not simply endure adversity, but was forged by it. In their union, two worlds had found a new beginning, a fusion of courage and hope, of memory and possibility. And it all began with one impossible act, breaking the chains that had bound not only a princess, but the destinies of two worlds. Now, as the sun rose higher and the galaxy waited beyond the window, Rowan and Lyra held each other close, content in the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together.